Good morning, everybody. I would like to congratulate my colleagues with Constitution's Day, as our country celebrated this today. I am Natalia Lushina, the head of the National Agency on Civil Service of Ukraine, and will be our today's moderator. There will be interest to facilitate the contents understanding of reports delivered by our participants. Switch to the channel with interpretation if you need. I'm glad to see all of you. I am glad to welcome you at our event. Recent events, that is the candidate status for Ukraine and Russia's aggression against Ukraine lead to mixed feelings on their one hand. We are happy to become closer to the European Union, but current tragedy in our country makes us do our best to save lives of our citizens. Thank you for your readiness to share your experience to discuss important issues of government bodies, effective functioning, their authority, and structure optimization, public service staff preservation, as well as public servants' professional training within their wartime and post-war periods. Your states faced the challenges of war, and you managed to reconstruct your states and establish a powerful public administration system. I would like you to share your experience with us. I hope we will have a fruitful discussion, and you will share your experience of post-war public service. The real experience of public administration in wartime is unique to the civilized world. And today we fight for our freedom, for our right to exist, for the future of our children. Ukraine and its system of public administration are currently being tested for strength and ability to transform rapidly. I am proud that the public service system of Ukraine within the first stage of the war has proved to be quite effective. The system did not fail, and civil servants and local government officials continue to work. They remain faithful to their oath at their workplaces in the armed forces of Ukraine territorial defense and volunteer organizations. The war has emphasized the challenges of optimizing public service. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the participants who have taken the time and opportunity to join the event, share their successful cases, and discuss the best ways for Ukraine to exercise public authorities effectively, optimize their powers and structure, preserve civil services staff, and provide civil servants with professional training in the war and post-war periods. Now, I would like to present our first speaker to welcome the participants. Thomas Astropolsky, an expert on decentralization and sectoral reforms issues of the representative office of the European Union to Ukraine, is given the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yes. Okay. Good morning, dear colleagues. Доброго дня, Pani Natalio, Szanowni Kolegi. Thank you for inviting me to speak on behalf of the EU delegation to Ukraine. And well, given the dire circumstances, it is indeed a very welcome and very timely initiative by the National Agency of the Civil Service to learn from other countries' experience in civil service transformation during crisis periods. Well, crises are usually accompanied by shrinking finances and the need to be even more efficient. And also some EU member states were struck by the crisis, for example, during the economic crisis over 10 years ago. More recently, COVID-19 pandemics was another such example which touched all of us. But of course, none of them came any close to the challenges that Ukraine has been facing under a full-scale Russian invasion on Ukraine. So here I fully agree with Pani Natalia. If we admire the reaction of the Ukrainian state for over 4 months now, it is also partly due to Ukraine's public administration and civil service, which despite all challenges showed extraordinary resilience, discipline, and adaptability. The state stands, the government and the parliament meet and take decisions, and the citizens continue to receive essential services. And indeed, among the horrible news coming on a daily basis, Thursday evening last week, we received an excellent one, namely that the European Council followed the European Commission's opinion and granted to Ukraine the status of candidate to the European Union. And this is, of course, an enormous opportunity, but also, and I remember it from my country of origin, an enormous task for the civil service at the next stage of the pre-accession process. And some indications were already highlighted in the opinion of the European Commission on how the post-war civil service should reflect the European standards in merit-based recruitment and selection, in training and development, in performance appraisal, promotion, and pay. And this is, of course, also linked to a broader context of reconstruction of the country. And we know that Ukraine is completing its work on the National Recovery Plan to be soon presented in the conference in Lugano, Switzerland. And public administration reform is certainly an essential part of it. And in this context, there is a consensus among international partners that the efforts and the resources made available should be clearly linked to the reform agenda, and public administration reform remaining, of course, one of the key ones. But what is important here, and once again, I will recall it from the experience of my own country of origin, at that time, at the time of pre-accession, we were confident that ultimately we were carrying out these reforms for ourselves, and not because they were imposed by anyone. Well, but no doubt, currently we are not living in normal times, and in this period, we will not do without extraordinary solutions. For example, constrained by the lack of finances or the possibility of regular recruitment process. But what matters, though, is that those solutions should be exceptional, temporary, and accompanied by a consideration that ensuring the state's administration quality and continuity is essential. Of course, the challenge is now how to materialize it in short, medium, and long term during war and post-war. But let me repeat, always based on the assumption that civil service is the heart of the governance structure of any country, both in peacetime and now during the war. So I hope this event today will facilitate this reflection, and based on some of the EU and non-EU experiences, the lessons will be drawn and the ideas on how to address these unique challenges. Well, let me assure you that the European Union continues to stand with Ukraine all along. So I wish you and all of us a fruitful event and a peaceful day of the Constitution. Slava Ukraini!
Glory to heroes. And thank you, Mr. Strapolsky. We appreciate your support of our country. And I have a pleasure to give the floor to Gregor Virant, the head of the Sigma program, to welcome the participants. The audience is yours.
Дуже дякую, Наталія. Доброго ранку всім. Good morning to everyone. Let me say first of all that my heart goes out to the victims of the massacre in Kremenchuk and to their families. It's just another atrocity, another war crime of Putin and his army, for which I'm sure they will be held accountable by justice sooner or later, but it will happen. I use every opportunity when I speak with the Ukrainian colleagues to express my admiration, to congratulate for your amazing bravery in defending your freedom, your country, but not only your country. You are actually defending the values of the free world. At the same time, of course, I would like to congratulate you for the big news of this week for the EU candidate status. And as Tomasz said, this means for you the beginning of a long and difficult, but also very rewarding journey. Don't forget that public administration reform, including civil service and HRM, constitutes a part of the so-called fundamentals of the accession process. So decisions taken in this area should be weighted also from this point of view. Now, this seminar today is about the civil service during and after the war. And in Europe, except for the experience from the Western Balkans, the terrible wars in the 90s in the Western Balkans, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, we don't have recent experience of that kind. We have the experience of the Second World War. I mean, we share this experience, but after that, the only war on European soil were the wars in the Western Balkans. And even those wars, in my opinion, I'm not sure they're really comparable. We will see. It will be very interesting what our colleague Neven Akshamia from the Civil Service Agency of Bosnia and Herzegovina will tell us or tell you today. My opinion is that the Ukrainian case is quite unique in this sense, and I think you have enough wisdom to deal with it. And if there's one thing to be said about the civil service in the war, in this Ukrainian case, I would say that the system really proved resilience and agility and has been delivering during the war. We have to recognize it. We have to congratulate and to thank all the civil servants for their dedication and for their courage. Now, on the other hand, of course, while we don't really have the recent war experience, so there's not much we can tell you about how to handle the civil service during the war. Of course, we have all the experience of the EU accession. And in this sense, we of course stand ready to support you with assistance and also with international experience, especially the ones of the newer member states of the European Union. From Sigma's perspective, of course, this means that our assistance, our work is at your disposal. You have the principles of public administration, which, by the way, are under revision as we speak. And we have already started discussing possible measurement in 2023. You remember we did the baseline assessment in 2018, and now would be a good moment, given the start of the accession process, to do another monitoring, another measurement. Of course, everything depends on the situation, on the war situation, on how what your possibilities will be. We have to discuss it together, the Commission, and of course the delegation, the government, and Sigma. As regards the needed direction of the civil service and HRM reforms, I would say this has been known for a long time. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel now or after the war. We all know what has to be improved. You have to improve further the recruitment procedures to make sure that the best candidate is chosen for the job, in particular for the top positions, for the top managerial positions. You have to streamline the organization of ministries, where there's a bit of confusion with the introduction of new directorates. You have to fully implement the HRM information system, and you have to implement a salary reform, which will lead you to competitive salaries and to fair salaries, because you have problems in both aspects. The salary system should be competitive, so that it could attract good candidates also from the private sector, from the universities, but it also has to be fair in terms of equal pay for equal job. And your system has issues with both, and there's a lot of work to be done. We hear a lot about the downsizing ideas. We've heard recently about the ideas to radically downsize the civil service. In this respect, I would say be careful. Now, if savings are needed, and obviously savings are needed, you have to finance the war, you have to finance your army, you have to help the people who have lost their homes and family members. Savings are needed, but all the burden of sacrifice in terms of savings should not be put on civil servants. It should be fairly distributed among all groups receiving from the budget. If there's one experience from the crisis situation from other countries, it is that it is very, very important to equally distribute the sacrifice of financial burden. There's no reason for civil servants to bear a heavier share than others. When talking about downsizing, the key questions must be sorted out first. Do we need to do it now with all the challenges upon our shoulders? Why do we have to do it? Is there a less painful way to get to the same objective? What will we do with the savings? Will we use the savings to finance the fighting? Will we use the savings to better pay those who remain in the office, who remain in the civil service? What are the realistic targets? You should be realistic about the targets. When we talk about downsizing, the government always has to make sure that it is about redundant positions, not about getting rid of people that, for example, the boss doesn't like. You should think about the social impact. You know, losing a job in the wartime is not the easiest thing. And also, you should think about the impact to processes. Redundancies should always be the result. I mean, establishment of a redundancy must be a result of analyzing and streamlining the process. First, simplify, streamline the process, and then establish that, you know, certain jobs, certain positions are not needed anymore. And management should have a key role in this process. If you go about it, clear and transparent communication on the objectives and process has to be taken care of. This is an absolute necessity. I have my own experience of downsizing. I have done it. Actually, I have led it. I have led on it in my country quite a long time ago. And we did it in a, I would say, in a relatively soft way. We didn't go for laying off. It took us approximately 10, perhaps even 15 years to reduce the civil service by 20%. But it was mainly through turnover. So when people left the civil service, we did not necessarily replace them with new ones. And, you know, year by year, step by step, we reached this goal of minus 20%. The recipe was discipline. You know, we have set the target, the objective, and then we followed year by year in a very disciplined way. Honestly, I personally believe in this approach to downsizing much more than radical solution overnight reduction of number of employees by 30, 40, I don't know, 50%. This is can be politically very attractive to say something like that, but in reality things are often quite different. I will stop here, and I would like to wish you a good continuation of the seminar. And of course, I will be listening with a lot of interest to what colleagues have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Virant. And we do appreciate your support of our country and our long-term cooperation. The floor is given to Benjamin Bobe, Hans Eidel's Fund to Ukraine, Moldova and Romania's regional representative, to welcome their participants.
Good morning, everyone. Dear Ms. Alyushina, dear colleagues, let me thank you for the opportunity to join today's event dedicated to civil service in crisis and post-crisis periods, and my congratulations to Ukraine on its Constitution Day. With the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a lot of challenges are arising at all levels of government, which are completely new and unfamiliar to civil servants and local government officials. However, one thing is very clear in this heroic effort of the Ukrainian people we all admire here in Europe so much. No progress can be made from a holistic perspective without efficient governance and without functioning public administration institutions in place. This is why public service has to stay strong in performance, which of course is directly related to size. Adaptation to this new situation is a key factor of success. After all, in the current martial law, the development of the state directly depends on the political education of citizens, especially civil servants and local government officials. They are the basis that will ensure the further sustainable development of Ukraine in the post-war period. Modern public servants must be well versed in legislation, know the innovations and the changes, and adapt to it. Work with a large regulatory framework, consider the complex system of public administration, participate simultaneously in the development and implementation of various projects, be able to work and make effective and efficient management decisions in the state of martial law. Apart from the passive motivation we have seen, all this requires constant updating of knowledge, formation of competencies that are necessary for successful work in the civil service. This is why we celebrate so much this international workshop we're all participating in. European integration is more than ever an important stimulus for Ukraine in the context of implementing economic reforms, strengthening the intellectual potential and cohesion of Ukrainian society and innovative economic developments in the post-war period. Today, with any doubt, it is our challenge to increase the functionality and effectiveness of public administration and local self-governance even more under these difficult circumstances. I'm convinced that today's workshop will provide all of us with key information elements of international experience that very quickly might be implemented and adapted to the Ukrainian situation, based on experience that have been made on the Ukrainian side during the last 4 months. Thank you all for your attention and wish you a fruitful work.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bobe. I really appreciate your assistance and support of the National Agency and our events. Yes. And our event foresees the discussion of national priorities regarding the public services functioning within the war and post-war periods. I will be the keynote speaker on this topic. Dear colleagues, the real experience of public administration in wartime is unique to the civilized world. Of course, Ukraine, as a democratic, peaceful country, would prefer to avoid this tragic, exclusive experience, but we have no choice. We fight for our freedom, for our right to exist, for the future of our children. Ukraine and its system of public administration are currently being tested for strength and ability to transform rapidly. I will try to outline certain trends in such a transformation of the public administration system of Ukraine. In general, the public service system of Ukraine within the first stage of the war has proved to be quite effective. Our unity and desire to be useful has reformatted our processes in the first hours of the armed aggression against Ukraine. The system did not fail, and civil servants and local government officials continued to work. People needed to receive the services, help, and support they needed. I admire the strength of spirit and courage of the people around me who work in the public service. Today, they remain faithful to the oath at their workplaces in the armed force of Ukraine, territorial defense, and volunteer organizations. They are saving lives, rebuilding infrastructure, working on the international front, simply responding to citizens' appeals on a daily basis and trying to help them. However, we have losses among our colleagues. They died because of the aggressor. I often joke that the COVID-19 pandemic prepared us for the war to some extent. Within the last 2 years, we have digitized many processes and have made great strides in building a system of distant mode. This was facilitated in particular by a system of special online communications and trainings. They were initiated before the war in the agency I had. We practiced electronic communication skills to counter the pandemic, but they proved to be useful in wartime. We all need to continue to develop remote formats and be ready for anything. We are currently training civil servants in civil defense skills, extreme logistics, chemical protection, and psychological support in emergencies. And it is not only during this period that such a training should become mandatory. It's about security and confidence in the future. The war has emphasized the challenges of optimizing public service. It requires organizational and technological innovation. We focus on remote control forms and a range of digital formats. We are working on these tasks within the strategy of the National Council for the Reconstruction of Ukraine, which was initiated by the head of state. Today, strategic trends for the development of public service are being developed. First of all, we are talking about digitalization with the bias towards remote services and the course of building a service state that is as loyal to the needs of citizens as possible. We have the political will and the public demand for amendments. A number of working groups are currently working in order to rebuild the country. One of them has been focused on public administration reform. Among the key areas are the following ones. It's formation of government effective functioning, its authority and structure optimization, implementation of a fair system of remuneration, implementation of an information human resources management system, adaptation of the civil service to the European Union standards, public service staff preservation, public service professional training within the wartime and post-war periods. And I am sure our cooperation and sharing experience, involvement, and commitment of international partners to common values will help with it. This will serve the foundation of Ukraine's reconstruction. Thank you for your attention, and glory to Ukraine. Glory to heroes. And dear colleagues, according to our agenda, next section is dedicated to the issues of government institutions functioning in crisis and wartime, public servants' activities issues, and their rights protection. Ladies and gentlemen, please stick to the time limit, which stands for 15 minutes. And UGI 6, the EU for PAR project's head, is given the floor. Mr. Six.
Natalia, hello, thank you very much. I must say that I am incredibly impressed with my Ukrainian colleagues, with the resilience that you have in the civil service and in public administration in general. I was just saying to Gregor now, after he spoke, that while he was speaking, there was an air raid siren in Riga today, a trial one, luckily a trial one. But I've heard so many times my colleagues in the Zoom in Ukraine during the meeting saying that we had to cut it off because there is an air raid signal. I think it's an incredible resilience, guys, that you put in. It's a pleasure to work with you. And we all hope that we can assist you in the process of improving civil service as we go. Another point that I wanted to make for the start, and I'm a speaker for the second panel today, where I will do a more detailed presentation. But the point that I wanted to make is that it's not only that you as civil service have made sure that the civil service works super effectively during this incredible time, but also, first of all, you've applied for the membership, you fulfilled the questionnaire, and you got the candidate status in less than 4 months, which I think is the record breaker anyway. You have also put together several thousands of pages of the recovery plan in 2 languages in even less time. And in parallel, you are discussing the reform of civil service and reform of public administration with an ambition that was not even there before the war. I think it's really incredible. My respect goes to you. And I really hope, and I will say this while Gregor Virant is present, my hope is when the new chapter in Sigma book of public administration principles opens, and opens on the resilience of civil service, resilience of public administration in the time of crisis. Maybe there is a space for that chapter in the future. I think Ukraine should be the benchmark setter, the one that you will use as the baseline for everybody else to follow. Yeah. And for the rest of my remarks, Natalia, I will deliver them in the second part of my presentation, which is in the second panel. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mr. Six. And just a moment. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Six, and thank you, Ian, for your speech and for your participation and support of processes of public service of Ukraine's modernizations. And I would like to invite Christos Petsimers, head of the Department of International Affairs, Directorate of Administrative Service of the Ministry of Interior of Greece. Please, the audience is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, dear Natalia, dear colleagues. It is my great honor to participate at your event. Thank you very much for the invitation. Under these circumstances, I'll try to talk as slow as I can, because I know that there is a great effort taking place by the translators. It is my great pleasure and honor to participate at this panel. This is my second participation at an event organized by your institution. The first one took place about a year ago on the graded system of the civil servants. And at that time, nobody really expected what would happen in the future. At first, dear colleagues, dear friends, Natalia, I have to apologize for having all of you rescheduling and changing your program and your agenda, because I was supposed to talk at the end of the event. But sometimes life becomes funny. It was only 2 days ago that I was informed that my colleague, who was about to participate at the joint conference of the OECD and European Commission's conference in Brussels on better regulation, was infected by COVID-19. So I was asked to replace her. And this is why now I'm giving this lecture, this speech not from Athens, but from Brussels. But due to technology, due to the time difference, as well as the late beginning of the event, I'm glad to participate, and thank you very much for having your agenda rescheduled. I would also like to express my warmest wishes and my warmest sympathy to the Ukrainian people. And we are all looking forward for this real nightmare to finish, to end, because the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is not a local, is not even a European issue, it is a global issue. And we are looking forward for this event to finish, for this tragedy to finish. Moreover, we are all willing to welcoming you in the European family and all the advantages, both Ukraine as well as European Union, we gain from this cooperation. At first, I would like to say that since the time is limited, I was asked to prepare a 15 minutes speech on the Greek crisis and the after crisis period. I'll try to spend the next valuable minutes provided to me in order to make this short intervention. I would like to tell you that as you know, Greece faced 10-year financial crisis, which ended only a couple of years ago. But it was not really the first crisis Greece has ever met. Due to its important geographical position, Greece has been involved in many war activities during last century. And apart from that, apart from the geographical position, it is the issue that as Greece decided to follow and do what Greece thought it was correct. And this is why it was involved in these war activities. So, on the other hand, the financial crisis we met was a very strong one. All the previous speakers mentioned this crisis, which influenced European countries one way or the other. Of course, it's not compared to a war, but somebody could say that the consequences of this crisis was equivalent to a war. During this crisis, there were voices, even European ones, mentioning that Greece should abandon European currency, even European Union itself. Hopefully, these voices had no result anymore. In order for you to understand how huge this crisis was, I have to mention that within 10 years, we had 7 prime ministers. So you can imagine that the consequences were really, really high. We also met many problems at the civil service, at the public administration. The most and the main problems we faced were the lack of personnel and the reduction of wages. Apart from the current personnel that more or less was obliged to retire, we also had what we call in Greece a brain drain. We had many highly educated Greek citizens who went abroad in order to reach better financial situations. On the other hand, civil servants felt very insecure because the lenders asked for very strict measures, most of them including civil servants. But on the other hand, I don't really want to focus on the problems we met, to focus on the problems that you probably are meeting now or in the near future. But I would like to emphasize on the solutions taking place. If I was about to speak on the most important solution, that would be the international cooperation. A strong cooperation between Greece, between Greek governments, with EU and other international institutions like the OECD. This cooperation helped making public services attractive, also focusing on a high level qualified personnel. We managed to move from a brain drain situation to a brain gain situation. We took measures to attract highly educated personnel and persuade many of young people who has gone abroad to come back and apply for a position at the public service. I have to admit that this crisis, this great financial crisis, was also for Greece an opportunity to make changes and reforms in public administration with the help of the OECD, with the help of European Union, European Commission, as well as with the help of the French government. I have to inform you that tomorrow there will be an event in the context of the DG Reform expert group meeting in Athens, where we are also going to celebrate this 10-year cooperation between the Greek and the French government in the context of reforming public administration. These reforms worked well. We used the opportunity, even if this opportunity was a financial crisis, to make changes that they should have taken place not only years, but even decades ago. But the political system and the other official authorities either did not have the willing or even the courage to change. We also followed many good examples, good practices from other countries and tried to implement them in the Greek public administration culture. That resulted in many efficient results. Greece is now an example of quality of services provided, especially not only to enterprises or financial sectors, but to citizens themselves. We also emphasize in the training of civil servants. If, in order not to spend your time, because I know that the time is limited and there are many very important lecturers that will proceed, I should emphasize 3 pillars of making public administration reconstruction. At first, I would like to mention the international cooperation. And as I said, when in the near future, Ukraine becomes a member of the European family, all this experience, all these best practices, all the European best practices will also be national Ukrainian practices. Also, there was a willing to change. The total political system decided that it was an opportunity to make important changes. And also the continuous life learning training program for the employees. Dear Natalia, dear colleagues, thank you very much for your time. I would like to wish a great success to your event and my warmest wishes to Ukrainian people. Thank you very much indeed once again.
Thank you for your speech, Mr. Christos, and thank you for sharing your experience with us, which may be of use for Ukraine. And I would like to invite Lech Martinkovsky, the leader of the professional team of public service and HR management issues within the Sigma program, and give him the floor. The audience is yours.
Thank you. Just make sure that I'm on camera. Hello. I will be presenting in the second panel. Therefore, most of what I wanted to say will be there. But I need to confirm and repeat what the head of my program said, namely Gregor Furant. We will remain with you like we have been with Ukraine for many years. We will contribute to your recovery and modernization now and after the war. Let me also join all colleagues in expressing respect for resilient public administration and brave defenders of Ukraine. Very soon after the war broke out, Sigma started thinking about the reconstruction of Ukraine. And as many of my predecessors underlined, every crisis is an opportunity. Well, this is true, but I don't like thinking about this. I still wish it had not happened in Ukraine, and we would just continue working on the reforms as we did without all the atrocities that the large-scale invasion of Russia brought to Ukraine. None of the Sigma's partner organizations, that is the Organization of Economic Development and the European Union, has recent experience with rebuilding member states after the war. Fortunately, I dare to say, studies that are available on countries that have been to war are hardly comparable to Ukraine, invaded by a neighbor. We have plenty of studies on Afghanistan, Timor, Burundi, Uganda, but they are not comparable, not to mention the scale of the country and its public service. Therefore, Ukraine has to find its own path of rebuilding the state and the public administration in particular. Preparation to the EU integration process seems from this perspective easier because it's well structured and foreseeable, and Sigma and our former beneficiary countries have recent experience with it. We will be ready and willing, but also genuinely happy to share them with Ukraine. And again, I'm only repeating what Gregor Virant, head of the program, has already announced. So I'm looking forward to the second panel. I will have some other observations, not only on the current state of public administration in Ukraine, but primarily on the years after. And I'm looking forward to all the participations, contributions, because it is already an extremely interesting conference. And I thank you for inviting us, Natalia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. And Mr. Lech. I like a few words. We appreciate your expertise, knowledge, and your readiness to give us a hand. I'm sure we can always rely on you. And I would like to invite Martin Skrivinch, the Sigma Program Regional Manager on European Neighborhood Policies and Manager on issues of Ukraine, and give him the floor. Mr. Martin, the audience is yours.
Доброго ранку, пані Наталія. Доброго ранку, доброго дня, шановні колеги. I will try to be very, very brief because I know that the time is running very fast, and for trying to somehow manage my involvement into the whole event, I have prepared a very short presentation to share with you a Latvian experience on how we were going through the crisis of 2008-2009 that our Greek colleague was sharing with you. But before I go into it, I really want to say a couple of very important things. First of all, don't take this presentation of mine as a possibility for a direct comparison with the situation in Ukraine, because there is no way we can compare the economic crisis or any other crisis with the large-scale aggression of Russia against Ukraine, all of the atrocities that we are currently seeing, and all of the challenges that you are meeting. So no direct comparisons. Second thing, before I start sharing my experience, I really want to reiterate once more the point that I think most of the speakers had been saying, is an absolute full respect and admiration about the work of every civil servant working in Ukraine, within the Ukrainian public administration, and still delivering on the functions, on the tasks, and making sure that the Ukrainian state not only functions, but I'm quite sure it will also win the war. So full respect for that. Last thing, as an intro, the things I will be sharing comes from my direct experience working in the Latvian State Chancellery during the crisis of 2008-2009. At that time, I was the head of department responsible for the public administration and very much involved in all of these reforms. And today I will be sharing more our mistakes and things you should be aware of and not repeat them, because with my current experience, with my current knowledge, and with my current brain, I would definitely not be doing very many things that we were doing back in 2008, because of course, when you are in the middle of the crisis, when you are especially in the epicenter of the whole crisis management, you definitely develop a tunnel vision. You don't have a possibility to look around. You think that you don't have time, which is wrong. And you think that you are the smartest person dealing with the public administration and civil service reforms. And trust me, it's not like that. So please take my presentation as a warning a little bit, and also as a point of learning of not repeating our mistakes. And now let's transfer in time back to 2007, 2008, and 2009, back to Latvia. In 2007, the context was great. We were having super huge economic growth. Everybody was partying. The annual budget was raising not only in general, but also in terms of the expenditure for the public administration. Increase of the salary levels, almost everybody getting bonuses, hiring people, developing ideas on how to widen the implementation of different state functions. And as we later understood, it was the last year of a full-fledged party, because the next 2 years were really tough ride for my country, not only in terms of seeing economic crisis and downward spiral, but also facing huge unemployment rates and a massive outflow of our citizens. Our prime minister of that time, basing his gut feeling, I would say, on some of the weak voices coming from the National Bank, was starting to feel that the economic crisis is coming around early 2008. But of course, he was the only one, because the ministers and also the state secretaries of our ministries thought it would be okay, we would manage, we have Europe behind us, we have structural funds coming into our country for development, and problems that were rising in America would probably not reach us, because we are so small, we are so open, and we are so smart. Sadly enough, it didn't go as nice as that. And also part of the problem was embedded in our political situation, which was pictured by quite a fragmented parliament and a very unstable coalition government, where the prime minister had to constantly take care of finding consensus, making compromises with different parties, and trying not to swing the boat too much, not to create a crisis. What was happening? Starting from April 2008 until around October, November 2008, the Prime Minister was politely asking his ministers to keep up with the ideas for the savings, to think on things that can be stopped, that can be cut, where we can economize on the resources. But honestly, the only answers he was getting was that, sorry, Prime Minister, we don't have any space for savings. We don't have any space for cutting. And actually, you know what? We need more money to finance some of the functions. So if you want cuts, please go to the neighboring ministry. Then in November, when the situation, the budgetary situation really grew very grim, and there was no doubt that the crisis has already arrived, The Prime Minister opted for using his rights that are granted under our law on Cabinet of Ministers and started issuing his personal tasks to all of the ministers, saying that first, limit paying out any bonuses, do not recruit any additional people, please stop any business trips necessary, etc., etc. But of course, this was giving very limited amounts of the savings, and we had to go deeper into quite regular amendments to the annual budget to adjust to the situation that kept deteriorating, and definitely the Ministry of Finance was coming basically each week saying that the reserves are going down the drain. This was continuing until February 2009, when the Prime Minister understood that with this kind of the approaches, you cannot reach the goals, and you need quite a radical approach to save the financial situation. So he sat down with 3 other people and prepared a very radical institutional reform, trying to cut all of the unnecessary institutions. He presented it at the coalition meeting the next day, and in a week's time, he was not a prime minister anymore, because the presented radical reform was too much for the coalition partners to swallow and accept. And they opted for a change of the government, which basically led only to the change of the prime minister. In March 2009, a new prime minister was appointed. He gave up his well-paid job in the European Parliament because he was the member of the European Parliament. He's now back to the European structures, and you know him as Valdis Dombrovskis, the current vice president of the European Commission. And he came back to Latvia and became the prime minister, and actually was the person who was saving our country from the financial crisis, leading it through, and also, of course, leading on the public administration reform. What happened then was to satisfy the needs of the international lenders whom we had already at that time. We prepared an action plan, as always, as normal public administration. We did an action plan on how to optimize our system and how to cut the civil service. Also, there was a review of functions together with all of the social partners. And of course, we didn't avoid the across-the-board budgetary cuts still that were needed besides all of the previously mentioned measures. What did the action plan focus on? It was basically 4 components. First of all, small public administration. First of all, cutting the number of the staff. Second was institutional, still cutting the number of the institutions, merging them. And also trying to make our internal structuring of the public administration much more slimmer and much less vertical. It is not, and it has stayed since like that. It's very lean public administration also currently. We also opted for professionalizing of the public administration. Still, despite the crisis, it was not only the way to preserve our School of Public Administration to at least with very small resources, but to provide the civil servants with opportunities for being trained, but also a major focus on improving the competencies of the top managers, the category A people, if we take the example of Ukraine. We also opted for working on the improvement in terms of the service delivery, so that despite the citizens would be facing the crisis, their experience vis-a-vis the state would be very good. And in that sense, I think this is exactly the thing we are seeing also in Ukraine, with the Ministry of Digital Transformation doing amazing things with the DIA platform. We try to improve the service delivery experience, but at the same time also try to bring some order into the regional branches of our state institutions, optimizing them and opting for one-stop shops wherever possible. Last but not least was structured about rebuilding the trust of the citizens, going full transparency, trying to make sure that each and every contract made by the public administration bodies are available online, so that citizens can follow which institution is spending money on what things and with which companies. How did it impact the civil service? And here I come to an extremely sad story, because the number of the civil service employees was radically cut by around 30%. In some ministries, it went up even to 40 and more percent. The number of the institutions was reduced by approximately 67% by merging them, abolishing very many of them, and saying no to some of the functions. The salary cuts amounted on average around 30%, although, for example, if I remember my own salary cut, it was around 45%. And of course, it went up for very serious reductions in all of the operational expenses. No use of business cars, no corporate events, no business travel, basically going for full-fledged economy. And why I said it was, or it is still a very sad story, because we managed to lose quite a bit of very, very good professional civil servants along the way. Plus, we did it in a very unsocially friendly way, because there were no particular social support programs for those who were laid off from the civil service. They got only a 1 to 3 months salary as a benefit, depending on their seniority, plus the normal labor code unemployment benefit. So a very radical, very harsh hit on the civil service, from which I think we are still recovering, especially in terms of the reputational damage. So key lesson learned from this: while everybody understands there is a huge pressure on the financial and fiscal targets, please do think on how to maintain the best civil servants and how to maintain still the employment in civil service, because the crisis at some point will end, but it will be super hard to get the good people back. In terms of the process management, we opted for quite centralized and decentralized way. The Prime Minister was still in charge for the government as a whole, with State Chancellery and Ministry of Finance looking after the cross-cutting issues, but quite a lot of flexibility was given to the Category A officials, the state secretaries, and heads of institutions in managing the cuts and meeting of the fiscal targets in their institutions. There was also a special functional review commission, and actually quite a big involvement of social partners and other external experts to make sure that somehow the ideas are thought out of the box a little bit, that there is still some check and balance system in place, not to go for too heavy cuts or too one-way cuts, but also to take a little bit of the blame of the huge cuts that were made within the public administration system, so that it's not only the government, but the responsibility is being shared. And of course, I cannot avoid saying that there was a very important role played by the Troika, as we call them, the European Commission, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, who were nudging us constantly on doing more, on trying to find out better solutions, without giving us clear medicine or recommendations, leaving the decisions to our side, but still trying to share their experiences from other countries and suggesting on what might be the approaches. Now I can say that sadly enough, we didn't listen to what they were saying. And I'm not saying that the external players are always right, but some of their experiences, like going for a full-fledged implementation of human resource management system across whole public administration and not only the central one, definitely is one of the issues that we should have listened much more carefully to them. In terms of the challenges, there were many. I will not go into the details of each of them because my time is running out, but I want to stress two things from this, my last slide. First, yes, we were trying to be transparent about the decisions. Yes, we were communicating very extensively with our citizens, with external partners. But we forgot that we need to ensure constant communication with the civil servants, with the people, with the public employees, with people working within the public administration system. So in that sense, I think that the work that the National Agency of Civil Service of Ukraine is doing currently with trying to organize such kind of seminars, with trying to reach out to the colleagues outside Kiev especially, is super important to try to explain what are the objectives, to try to explain what's the real situation, to try to come up with a jointly devised solutions and not just going for a top-down approach, imposing the reform and saying, do whatever you want, but by tomorrow you have to do it without any explanations. That was our mistake. Please, please continue internal communication within the civil service and public administration in general. Point one. Point two, I will repeat myself, but please, please, when you are doing the cuts, and they are most probably inevitable, you will have to do the cuts because of the financial situation and the fiscal situation within the budget. Make sure that the cuts try to save as many good professional civil servants as possible, because retaining this core group of the civil servants will play absolutely essential role after the war, so that you can really, really rebuild Ukraine much better than it was after the war, and also make sure that you will be able to really implement all of the required reforms. With this, дуже дякую і слава Україні!
Glory to heroes. Thank you, Mr. Martins. Thank you for your speech, and thank you for sharing your experience with us, which may be of use for Ukraine. We appreciate your experience, expertise, knowledge, and trust. Our next speaker is Reda Reconstruction, the government offices Chancellor of Lithuania. The audience is yours. Ms. Reda.
Thank you very much. I also have some presentation and I will share it with you. So can you see? Can you see the presentation? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, so I can only repeat what Martin said about the presentation and the experience, that no direct comparison are possible due to the nature of a large-scale invasion of Russia against Ukraine. And I will present Lithuanian experience during economic and financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. As at that time, I worked in the civil service department of Lithuania. So I think that my presentation can be distinguished into two parts. The first part will be more about the reduction of resources, and the second one will be about improvement and optimization in civil service. So in 2008, the growth of economic indicators was replaced by the recession, the same like in Latvia, of course. GDP decreased, increased inflation, and it also affected labor market instability, and workforce demand decreased and unemployment indicators raised. In Lithuania, the maximum number of positions, I want to stress, of civil servants and employees working under labor contracts in civil service institutions in respective areas is regulated by government, by president, parliament, and municipalities. I mean that, for example, government approves the maximal number of civil servants and employees positions in ministries and agencies accountable to them, and this number could not be exceeded. So decisions on the reduction of numbers of positions were taken, and there were less people recruited to civil service and more people left, and not necessarily because of abolition of position, but also because of other reasons, retirement and so on. So in general, during 2008 to 2011, number of occupied positions of civil servants and employees in civil service institutions was reduced about 10%. And the financial and economic crisis has had a major impact on the civil service remuneration, as those fundings has been cut during the crisis. Yes. So in 2008 and 2011, state budget expenditures on wages of civil servants and employees under labor contract who worked in civil service institutions decreased by 17%. The remuneration of politicians, officials, judges were reduced also, but here I will present reduction of civil servant salaries. In Lithuania, civil servants are those who perform public administration functions in state and municipal institutions and agencies. And I will briefly present some explanations about the reduction of salaries. Until 2019, in Lithuania was operating another remuneration system, and the salary of civil servants consisted of official salary, bonuses, and additional payments. And it's important to say that official salary was a main part of salary, and it was about 83–85%. The positions of civil servants were distributed into 20 categories, and each category had a coefficient, and the amount of official salary was calculated applying the salary coefficient. Another important dimension calculating salary was the basic amount, and in 2009, the amendment of the law on civil service was made, and the possibility of setting lower basic amount than the existing one in cases of significant deterioration of the economic and financial situation of the state was foreseen. So since 2009, the salaries of civil servants have been reduced several times. The basic amount and salary coefficients have been reduced from May of 2009 and then from August 2009. It's important to stress that salary coefficients were reduced only for higher categories and the higher official salaries, the categories from 11 till 12. Because of 12 category was a category of head of institution, chancellor, or already top managers. The bonuses of qualification classes were also reduced from August 2009. The bonus for qualification was granted during the performance appraisal procedure when civil servants' performance was evaluated as very good. There were three qualifications classes. The lowest was third, and it was 15% of official salary, and it was reduced to 10%. Second qualification class was 30% of the official salary and was reduced to 20%. And the highest class was the first one, 50% of official salary was reduced to 30%. So during the crisis, the salaries of civil servants were reduced by 36%, mostly of civil servants in senior and managerial position. And in 2013, the Constitutional Court of Lithuania took a decision on reduction salaries of civil servants and judges, and the court said that amendments to the law which reduced the salaries of judges and civil servants during the financial crisis were in conflict with the Constitution of Lithuania, and according to the court, Constitution was contradicted by unequal, for some smaller and for others higher, reduction of salaries. Accordingly, the resulting pay gap had to be reimbursed by the government within a reasonable time. So this was a part one, briefly about reductions. And now I move to improvements and optimizations in civil service. An important role in this process of optimization was played by a so-called Sunset Commission. The full name was Commission for the Improvement of Public Administration. Commission was established by government in January 2009 and worked until 2012 during the cadency of 15 governments. So government assigned the commission to submit proposals in the field of public administration reform regarding strategic planning, institutional framework, civil service, structural reform, and efficient management of state property. Commission activities were not limited to the mission of reducing the number of institutions and saving resources, but also to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the public sector. A reduction in budget fundings was not intended to reduce the number of civil servants or other employees in the sector in general, but to review internal functions, structures, operational process, to find internal reserves and to redeploy them to improve the quality of public services. During Commission's work, the management structures were optimized and some duplication of functions in executive power institutions and agencies eliminated. For example, there were reduced territorial subdivisions of institutions accountable to the government, which were independent legal entities. They become just territorial subdivisions without a status of independent legal entity. Also, a network of groups for the improvement of management was created in the ministries. These groups prepared proposals for the improvement of the management of the ministries and their subordinate institutions to increase the efficiency of activities and to reduce costs, as well as to organize and monitor the implementation of the proposals. Process and project management, implementation of quality management systems, wider application of information technologies were used. So in order to achieve greater efficiency in public administration, the evaluation of support functions efficiency in institutions and agencies subordinate to government were introduced. And strategic planning process was complemented by assessment of the support functions of the institutions, and the assessment criteria were approved by the Minister of Finance in 2010. So implementation of such functions as personnel management, document management, public procurement, accounting, service, and others take place in many institutions and agencies and are essentially identical. As they are performed and managed in different ways, there were a possibility to do it in more optimal and standardized ways. So the evaluation of support functions efficiency was the first step to in the way of centralization. And in the area of civil service, some changes in performance appraisal and recruitment of civil servants were introduced. In the recruitment system, the procedure for submission of documents was simplified. Tests of legal knowledge were complemented by questions on general skills and abilities, and performance appraisal system, the individually determined tasks linked with the strategic objective of the institutions were introduced, and the performance of civil servants assessed on the basis of the achievement of these tasks. And also, maybe this is for already another session, but I would like to add that from 2009, the project with the support of EU structural funds started in order of further modernization of civil service. So one project was intended to standardize and create job description catalog, determine the competencies necessary to civil servants, develop competency model, develop and respectively upgrade the EHRMS system, provide trainings and recommendations for civil servants. And another project was intended to improve selection system, to develop modern selection tools for civil servants. And the third was intended to modernize existing civil servants register and EHRMS system, and to develop open data on civil service, open data portal about civil service data. So that is all. I hope I wasn't, I saved maybe even time, but maybe not. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Reda, and thank you for your interesting report and readiness to share your experience with us. And I had the honor to introduce our next speaker, Damir Akhmetovich, the international expert of the Center of Integrated in Defense sector. Please, dear Damir.
Thank you, Natalia. My greetings to everyone, especially to the Ukrainian colleagues. It is, as all my predecessors basically said, it is amazing to witness the kind of resilience that you have shown, and I will never forget that day. It was just a day after the start of the aggression, when we exchanged messages, and I received a picture of people from the civil service agency with Natalia standing in front of them, all reporting for work. And that looked really so reassuring, touching, a mix of emotions really coming out from that simple picture. I think it was clear to me on that day that you understood that the battle is not being led only in the battlefield, that the battle is being led also in offices, in institutions, and your ability to mobilize yourself to, you know, shake off initial shock and start working for the benefit of citizens and everyone else in the Ukrainian society, it became apparent. And I cannot find the words to really describe my my respect for what you've done so far. Most of my predecessors spoke about cuts in the numbers of people, about reductions, about the need to find the formula of functioning in these challenging economic times, apart from everything else. You know, the Ukrainian economy is facing some very challenging moments, and it's not easy to you know, feel the budget. But since it was said so much about it, I would like to say a few words about something else, and something that is closer to my expertise, which is managing people, managing civil servants in these dire circumstances. I cannot agree more with my colleagues from Sigma, especially Martin's delivered that message, I think, quite clearly, that you have to be really careful when downsizing. If you lose people that are really needed, then the damage afterwards can be huge, and you are playing, if I can say so, you are playing then directly into the hands of the enemies if you let yourself lose your best people. So be careful not to do that. But let me say a few things about what it means to manage civil servants in the time of war. First of all, the war, we often hear that the war is something that brings the best and the worst in people, unfortunately. And managing people in the times of war is a huge challenge. In the peaceful times, we are often calling on you to develop management skills, to develop managers. But in the times like this, in the times of war, managers need to find a way to also upgrade themselves to be leaders as well. And why is this important? It's important because people that work in the times of war, civil servants, they are looking up to their superiors for support, for advice, for motivation. It is very important for those people to be able to explain to subordinates their role in these times. They need to understand, ordinary civil servants need to understand that the rights and responsibilities in the war are not the same as the rights and responsibilities in the peaceful times. In fact, certain rights, of course, need to be preserved, but the focus is on responsibilities. And if there are times when individual employees, civil servants need to think less about their rights and more about their responsibilities, it is the times during the war. It's the same what those heroes in the front lines are doing. They are not thinking so much about their rights now, even their rights to life. They are thinking about their responsibilities. And the same kind of spirit needs to be shown by those delivering services in the offices. The key competencies, somebody was talking about competencies earlier. The key competencies in this time are not the same as the competencies during peaceful times. Result orientation, for instance, is now hugely important. Flexibility is of extreme importance. You cannot choose what you do. You cannot choose when you do your work. You have to show flexibility. And one thing that I personally believe is probably the key is positive thinking. I think it is the duty of managers or leaders, basically, to identify people who are, and that's normal. It is absolutely normal for some people to crack under pressure. It is normal for people to have dark thoughts from time to time. It is the duty of managers to address these individuals, to talk to them, to find a way of motivating them to somehow reduce the negative thinking, and to make them believe that A, what they do is very important, and B, that the victory should not be and cannot be a subject of any doubt. Unfortunately, if there are people who cannot get over that hurdle, I believe that those people may not be suitable to do their work in the present circumstances, because their own attitude will affect the others. I would like to end by saying that it is also very important, even in normal times, there are people who are, who have the habit of speculating. There are people who have the habit of gossiping, spreading all kinds of information. That should be the role of managers to deal with this. Suppressing speculation and suppressing all kinds of wild information, and we are witnessing a huge battle in the internet, because of all kinds of people with very, clearly Russian agenda. Basically, they are trying to put information which will then be spread by those who are easily swayed, and the whole thing then escalates into something that you don't need. So this should be also somehow suppressed. People should be aware of this, and especially managers should suppress this kind of wild speculation. I would like to end by saying that the whole thing will stop one day. We don't know how quickly, but sooner or later this will stop. I think Ukrainian state, public administration will then have just a change of battle. You will go out of one physical war, if I can say so, and will enter into another kind of war, a kind of war where people will see a lot of money coming as part of reconstruction efforts. And in my own country, we have seen a lot of corruption happening as a result of so much money coming for different purposes. A lot of people will appear who will fish in murky waters, and very strict mechanisms will need to be in place in order to make sure that the manipulation and misappropriation of these funds and assistance does not take place. But that's probably a subject of another discussion at some other time. I use the opportunity to congratulate all of you, your Constitution Day. Slava Ukraini and Slava Gerojami.
Glory to heroes, and thank you. And Mr. Damir, we do appreciate your experience and expertise, knowledge and trust. And dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to have a 30 minutes break. See you in 30 minutes, that is 12:30. Thank you. And break.
Все.
Здравствуйте. Здравствуйте.
День добрый, Израиль. Так? Я вас представлю на русском языке, несмотря на то, что у нас идет и семинар на английском. Хорошо, и вы будете свой спич делать на русском языке, поделитесь с нами опытом. Хорошо, спасибо, Анна, спасибо, что подключились.
Добрый день. Меня зовут Анна Жватовская.
Стоп, секундочку, мы еще не подключились, там у нас есть регламент, и мы будем, я вас обязательно объявлю на русском, и тогда, госпожа Анна, вы начнете свой спич. Хорошо, спасибо. Dear all, I'm glad to see you back. I hope you have had your break. And according to our agenda, this section is dedicated to the following issues. The development of the new model of public service in post-crisis, post-war periods, public services recruitment, KPI, prevention and of the staff turnover, and development and maintenance of corporate culture in government institutions, psychological support of public servants in post-crisis, post-war periods. Ladies and gentlemen, please stick to time limit, which stands for 15 minutes. And our first speaker, Ugi Six, the EU4PA project's head, is given the floor. Mr. Six, please.
Dear Natalia, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak in this very important event, because I think it not only underlines the issues that Ukraine is facing now, but also gives space for everybody to look a little bit beyond and focus on what comes next. And my talk will be very much in the context of what is now and what comes next, assuming that there are quite a few proposals on the future on the table. They all deserve merit. They all are good proposals. However, they all need to be discussed in the context of where civil service is going. I will be reasonably general, not specific on purpose, because I really want to flag some of the issues that we need to focus. I believe we need to focus. You need to focus in almost philosophical terms before getting into very specifics of the reform. Yeah? And I will use a presentation to guide my talk, but it's not necessarily to be followed by you in detail. Yeah? So, very briefly, I'd like to talk actually about 4 things to you today. One is about the context in which we are all talking about the future, and whatever the dimension of the future is. I believe that the context of today will be with us for at least several years, and we cannot escape from it. We have to take it into account. Yeah? Second, I'll talk also about the tasks that or the objectives that civil service, together with the political system, has in the country, because I think that will set the stage for things like what competencies we need to have in civil service in the next 3, 4, 5, 7 years, and also where we need to strengthen the civil service and where we have more room for optimization, rationalization, etc., as discussed in the first part of the day. Some people mentioned cuts. Third, I will a little bit talk about the new model of civil service, and I will not go into any technical specifics of it, but just highlight the issues that I believe need to be addressed before we discuss the technical side of the model. And last but not least, a little bit talk about how to manage the whole thing. And I'll keep to my 10 minutes. So let's talk about the context first of all. So the first thing, and very obvious to you all, I don't have to go into, it's about us living in a super uncertain environment. We all hope that the war will end tomorrow. We all know that Ukraine will have victory in this war. However, we don't know how long it will take. And the longer it takes, but also after the war, there will be a big fiscal challenge on the whole kind of public expenditure, including civil service, because there will be so many needs that will have to be addressed. I mean, there are already big needs today. We talk about 5 billion deficit every month. And that will remain, and that will create a degree of uncertainty, and a lot of that is outside our control. What is in our control is the fact that we have quite a few proposals about reform on the table. They are all very interesting, smart, forward-looking proposals. However, unless they are clarified for the civil service in terms of the agenda, the actual agenda to be followed, they will create uncertainty. Yeah. So the longer the discussion of the public discussion of the proposals goes, the more there will be the period of uncertainty. So the second point in the context is very much to reflect on what other speakers, especially the Latvian, Lithuanian, and Greek speakers from the earlier session talked about, is about the risks. Yeah? So first of all, any bigger restructuring, any optimization plan that comes ahead of us is to be tested against the continuity of the state. I mean, I talked in my very brief introductory words about Ukraine's civil service being so resilient, showing example to everybody else, that I think this is a value that needs to be kept. Yeah? The question, how do we keep that value going forward if we need to rationalize, if we need to optimize, and if we have to face fiscal challenges, which will call for sort of expenditure, maybe starting optimization. Yeah? There is also a risk that Martin pointed out very clearly about in any big change, the better people leave because they go for more certain environment. I think it's very important for us in the Ukrainian civil service to keep the best people in the offices and not allow them to go. We should also say that it's not for the first time that we do substantive government restructuring, and many civil servants have already kind of a fatigue about it. And more restructuring will bring more fatigue. And this will not be very motivational for the very resilient civil service that we face now. And of course, also, it's about the employer. I mean, with you, Natalia, we always talked about civil service being the employer, the bigger civil service being the employer. And the way it handles its employees now and post-war will be very much reflecting on the image of that employer in the future, and therefore attractiveness of that employer in the future. And last but not least, there is always the risk of doing things too fast. Doing things too fast is okay. However, there might also be things missed in that speed kind of thinking. Last point on the general context, considering the uncertainty, considering the risks, my advice or more of sort of a thesis would be, first, of course, see this situation as an opportunity. As somebody said in one of our earlier COVID discussions, a good crisis should never be wasted as an opportunity. But indeed, let's see this as an opportunity for smart transformation. Secondly, I believe that large part of the uncertainty, large part of risks comes from the fact that we all feel that we need to rationalize. Rationalize, including the staff optimization, headcount cut. And in that context, we need internally, at least, a very clear perception from the Ministry of Finance of what is the outlook. What are the basic scenarios that we're looking at in terms of the fiscal side of optimization that we need to achieve now. And by knowing that, we can develop scenarios within civil service, how to be resilient, how to stay resilient, but also move towards the reform. Also, I think we need to achieve a kind of a very delicate balance between the kind of speed of change, on the one hand, on the other hand, the stability and the continuity needed, and third, a very smart design that helps Ukraine to build the best ever civil service in the future. My general remark, and it reflects on one of my mentors' remarks, is do not put any ink on any legal draft before the model is clear. And I think this applies also to this reform. My second point that I want to go into is very much about what is the context within which we need to think about what kind of civil service we should have exiting the war and the immediate post-war situation. And here I want to, for me, there are four major objectives in this sense. So the first and the basic one is to make sure that the state goes on, that there is continuity, right? That the basic policy making, the basic legislative process, the basic management of day-to-day keeps going, right? And that's very important. Also, in terms of services to citizens, online or offline, that they're available. There are existing services, there will be new services coming related to the situation that we are all in now. But it's important that this capability is maintained. And of course, there are a number of reforms that have meant a lot for Ukraine. There are more of them that I mentioned on my slide, but I mentioned only two that are critical for public administration reform, which is decentralization and digitalization. So they have to go. So continuity is an important task. The second important task for me is rebuilding of the country. That comes within the framework of the recovery plan. It's being finalized. There will be a lot of projects to be accomplished. And that will be a big task for the civil service at all levels, and not only the civil service. It concerns infrastructure, it concerns sectorial reforms, it concerns a lot of emerging, and even some that we cannot anticipate at this stage, social issues. But it is also related to civil services' ability to work with international partners, with international financial institutions, to ensure support, access to financing, etc., etc. So these are the core competences that the civil service will have to have as part of rebuilding the country. The third element in the objectives setting of things for me is what concerns European integration. We have the candidate status now, right? We still have to see what is our ambition in terms of completing the journey. The quickest state, as my research shows, who did it was Austria, which is 6 years, but they were miles ahead what my country was or you are at this stage. So if we would say 10 to 15 years when we accomplish all the tasks related to European integration, what impact it has on the civil service and what competencies and abilities civil service should have. Yeah? So first of all, it's keep the association agreement going, implementation of that agreement going, but it will expand, it will cover more areas until the point when it covers all of the acquis. And when I say acquis, we talk of 130,000 pages of legal text that needs to be accommodated in the Ukrainian legislation, okay? That is not only technically to be accommodated, but that requires impact assessment, discussion with stakeholders, financing for implementation, building the institutions that can implement it, and making sure this is being implemented. Yeah? And that's, we're talking 10 to 15 years. In more practical terms, there's going to be a screening where jointly the European Union and Ukrainian administration will look on the existing legislation, how much it complies with the European legislation. There will be planning of legal approximation. There will be doing of legal approximation with all the consultations. There will be negotiations process with the EU, etc., etc. And that all will require capacity in the civil service, especially in the ministries. In the public administration reform sense, European integration will be about three things. First, it's about implementing Sigma principles, because public administration reform is one of the chapters in the EU negotiations process. Second, it will be about sectorial reforms related to approximation to the acquis. And third, it will be about making sure that Ukraine, as part of European integration process, gets the best deal out of it, yeah? Meaning the capacity of institutions to negotiate. Yeah? And last but not least, I believe building trust to civil service, both within the civil service, towards the government and civil service and international partners, also vis-a-vis each other is very important. No. The third point I'd like to talk about is what are the features of the new model. And here I will go back to 2018. I don't think this agenda has changed. Okay, if we talk about European public administration in Ukraine in the future, and this is civil service in particular, these are the scores that we had across 9 dimensions of Sigma in 2017 and 18. Yeah? We had 2 top scorers, the first and fifth, which is 5 and 4. I believe that if the measurement was to be done today, the scores would be lower than these. So we basically that's the agenda. This will not go away. This will stay with us. We need to keep focusing on it. Beyond that, I would like to point out to 3 basic things that I'd like you to think about when we talk about the model of the future civil service. So one is what I call the mental model, right? I think we need to, in a post-war focus, we need to focus on the systems thinking, the civil service model as a whole. We should stop talking about amendments to the law on civil service. Because we have a lot of amendments without really ever touching the fundamentals of the model. But unless we are clear on the model, we cannot move forward with the amendments. Secondly, I often hear from my colleagues that talking about the models and their objectives is waste of time and we need to get practical. And I think we a little bit need to shift. We need to talk about the model, because unless we talk about the model, unless we agree on the model, we will be in a constant change of law and civil service. Third point that I'd like to make, civil service reform cannot be separated from how political sphere of life sees the civil service. Yeah? I don't think that civil service reform can be a technical implementation of Sigma principles in the law on civil service, in the law of civil service. I think the political sphere and the top of civil service should jointly see what kind of civil service we are building and build it. Yeah? And I think that's something we need to focus in the future. Also, we need to think of incentives. Sometimes we get into the mode of deciding on something and saying everybody should apply it. But we do not ask the question, what will make every manager in the public administration to wish to apply it in the best spirit of the proposal. Yeah? And I think this focus on incentives should be the next generation of reforms in the civil service. Incentives. My second point is about ownership. I think there is a big limit that any reform can accomplish from top down. Okay, and we need to create ownership at the level of every institution, ownership which is shared across civil service and across public administration. Okay, for that we really need to work with the top managers, which relate to attraction, recruitment, selection, development, and stability of that cadre. Okay, we haven't really succeeded in this area, but we should in the next period. And for that, we first of all need to sort out where category A is in the management structure of ministries and central executive bodies, etc. State secretaries, are they the ones who lead the pyramid, as was intended in the law, or they just manage the technical side of ministries? For example, we also need to achieve sort of a political consensus that developing civil servants, top cadre, which is stable and professional, is a common good for everybody and therefore should be preserved by everybody. We need to develop completely new selection and recruitment model, because the current one has not been delivered. And we need to work on how the top managers can work as a team, how they can have the same values, the same behavior, the same attitude, etc. And that's a big post-war objective. And last one, I'd like to talk about some sort of smart balance as an objective. I think from the past, we can learn that a central system where the rules are created and communicated down does not work. Institutions don't apply them. Institutions game them. Okay. But we are also not completely prepared for total autonomy, right? And probably total autonomy would not be fit for the challenges that I talked about earlier. So we need to find a good balance between the central guidance and autonomy. And for that, I think we need to identify where the central competencies are and where the local competencies are. For me, the central competencies, of course, are in using common data for policy making. Everybody should be part of common data, producing information for policy making, which can be adjusted. We talk about recruitment, selection, promotion, development of top officials. I think it's also centralized, should be centralized function. We talk about a uniform salary system within which everybody can pay decently to the employees. And I think that's also something to be generalized for the whole of civil service, as well as internal mobility rules. Yeah? For the rest, I believe we have space for issuing guidelines, but also keeping institutions accountable for complying with the guidelines, which is a good drive for them to comply with the guidelines. To move forward, and here I will not spend a lot of time, you know all this. I believe that what's important, and that's my point number 4, is to focus on reform leadership, and that relates to political leadership, which involves Office of President, civil service, meaning the Cabinet of Ministers, as well as the Verkhovna Rada. And first and foremost, it involves the building of political consensus of what type of civil service we're building. Because to me, that's the major part in the game. And of course, communicating that model and making sure that the change happens. The political leadership, of course, will have to have a small team of very technically capable thinkers who see the model, who are able to link it to all other reforms, public finance, decentralization, accountability, state-owned enterprises reform. Civil service should be linked to them. And you need a team of those thinkers that will support the political team to move this forward. And at the next level, you have more kind of tactical support team that is needed, which is everything that has to do with policy making, legislative drafting, guidelines for ministries, internal communication within the civil service, using sort of the common data platform like HMS, and also working with the top managers. Whether it's one competence center, but it's several competence centers, it's less important at this stage. Yeah. Now, to conclude, what I'd like to say is basically 6 points. One, also reflecting on what Gregor said, unless fiscally hardly pressed, don't rush with the reform, think it through. But anyway, crisis is an opportunity to think about more rational public administration. Yeah. Second, do not think of civil service reform as a technical reform. Most of the dilemmas that we have in civil service are political dilemmas. And unless they're answered politically, civil service reform will have no chance. Third, think about reform in the context of what competencies, abilities civil service should have. And for me, that's the continuity, that's rebuilding the country, that's European integration, and that's building the trust within, with society, and with international partners. Four, of course, in terms of public administration reform and civil service being part of that reform, OECD's Sigma principles will stay. All the 9 indicators are modified, maybe, as Gregor said, they will stay. However, the civil service reform should be also more deeper, because it will reflect the capacity within which Ukraine and the European Union will negotiate the terms of accession. And that's not reflected in Sigma criteria. Yeah? Fifth, I believe, and probably if I could choose one thing, I would choose this thing. The civil service reform should move away from the legal perspective. I think it's not about changes to the law on civil service. It's about what we are trying to achieve and what model we are trying to implement. That is about creating ownership at the level of every institution of public administration for the reform and making sure it's uniform ownership. It's about right balance between central guidance and autonomy, and a control in a smart way, and thinking holistically. And last, of course, I already gave you proposals, and I feel finished with the question: who leads, who thinks, who communicates, who delivers? What is the team? Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mr. Six. Thank you for your speech, for your recommendations. We appreciate your experience, your expertise, knowledge, and trust. I have a pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Neven Akshamia, the head of the Agency on Civil Services Issues of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The audience is yours, Mr. Akshamia.
Thank you. I have a pleasure to say something about building of civil service and public administration in post-conflict environment. Although situation is not the same, situation is not the similar, that was in late 19th, which means before 25 years ago, but we was post-conflict society and post-war society especially. And we have situation to have building public administration from nothing in that moment. the war was over in 1995, and in 1996 we start with some basic programs of reconstruction, and in these terms we have a legal framework which we inherited from the previous period, which means from socialistic period. And we have not some major reform in first 5 years. And I think this situation is completely different comparing with Ukrainian. Your war started when you was in the midst of reforms, and that was different, major difference. What was the problem with in that moment? First, we have, as my previous colleague said, we had budgetary issues, which means fiscal problems. And generally speaking, huge amount of money from the budget went to salaries, but despite to this, these salaries was relatively low, and that create a problem, especially with retention and in a little bit smaller scale in recruitment. Recruitment was not an issue because we have not major reforms in that period, and lack of these reforms of civil service and generally public administration not required recruitment at a larger scale. But retention was a problem in some kind. Why? Because immediately after war, we started with main project of reconstruction. This project of reconstruction requires implementation units, and these implementation units was more attractive than standard civil servants positions, especially due higher salaries. And capable and competent civil servants went to these implementation unit for different programs of reconstructions. My opinion is that you will have also a very strong program of reconstructions after the war, because Ukraine is in the focus of complete war, not only of European countries, European Union, and you will have strong reconstruction program, and that was issue of our civil service, but not so great problem, because we have day-to-day operations, no main reforms, no establishment of new institutions behind the classical concept of civil service. In this situation, corruption was not a main problem, but we have two kinds of corruption. First, due to low level of salaries, we have problem with corruption in some segment of civil service, not in all, because there is no opportunity. Decisions are made on high political level, and that was political corruption, which means huge corruption. But there was also low corruption, because salaries of inspectors, of police officials was low, and issue of corruption was problem. But contrary to nowadays, contrary to this moment, there was no so important issue about corruption. But I think that you must take account that in after the war, after the conflict, that will be, and that was in Bosnia and Herzegovina, time for great opportunities, but also a time for great activities which create good environment for corruption. In fact, we wait about 6 or 7 years to real professionalization of civil servants, to establishment of civil service agency, and to start with real reforms. For instance, recruitment was performed without any structured principle of recruitment. Okay, in the time we not speak about competencies, behavioral competencies, what is important issue today, but there is no obligatory testing for recruitment. For instance, which means sometimes recruitment was done without any public competition, with superficial screening of application and decision which was made by a political appointee or director who was also openly or covertly political appointee. Why? Because in that time we have a system without managerial civil service at all. Managerial position, which was secretary of ministries and assistant ministers, was also political appointees. Not political appointees strictly, but we could call them semi-political appointees. Why? Because they are appointed without any public competition by decree of government, which means that all managerial positions are filled without any testing, without any competition, without any interest. Only minister said, this person will be assistant minister for finance, and hands up, this person was appointed, because appointment of these officials was centralized. I think you will have not this problem because you have some level of professionalization which avoid these issues. About we have not any psychological support for civil servants in post-crisis period, unfortunately. Our behavior was, okay, war is over, and we must turn next page, go to the next goals, and without any problems which we had in that period, without any psychological problems. Now we are aware that we have some kinds of PTSD, especially after start of war in Ukraine. We now older people and or middle-aged who remember our war, that was a very strong resembling of our war, because the situation in Ukraine, the military situation is not similar, especially not the same, but pictures of buildings of in flame, of bombardment, that strongly resemble us to our war, and these wounds may be healed, but it was opened again after these after war in Ukraine started. That means that you must have some program of psychological support for your personnel who was in public administration in any position, and especially between veterans of war, because most people in administration after the war, even nowadays, including me, are war veterans. We have not any psychological support for our war experience. But I think that this psychological support is necessary. That's from me, and I think our experience will be useful, and you will be in better position after your war than we was after our war. Thank you for opportunity.
Mr. Akshamir, I have now you in person for almost 4 years already, and I am glad to see you again. Thank you for your participation. And our next speaker is Tomislav Micetic, the head of the Quality Management Service of the Ministry for Justice and Public Administration of Croatia. Mr. Tomislav.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Hope you can see me. I will have a very short presentation to stick with the timing, 15 minutes. Already I should start, but I will do my best. So first of all, I will thank you very much for having us and letting us to present us, let's say, our experience. And second of all, to congratulate you on the candidate status. We went very long time ago, so we are actually the last to enter you, and we are, let's say, fresh, although it was 9 years ago, let's say, our entrance to the EU. So I will share the screen with you so that you can follow me a little bit easier, although it's in English, but I will share you so that you can translate. Just a second to hope that you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So the content, content of my presentation, I will give you a little bit about Croatia. Some information about our reform public administration and strategic overview, because due to the timing and 6 topics, I concentrate on only 2. So I put my focus on organizational managerial culture in government authorities and psychological support from a little bit different angle than my colleague from Bosnia and Herzegovina did. And last slide would be on some, I would say, lessons learned in, I would say, this reform process. So regarding Croatia in a nutshell, so we are a quite small country in the, I would say, heart of the Europe. GDP is 14,000 euro from the last year. We are, as I said, 9 years already. Next year we would celebrate 1 decade of the EU membership, and we just started OECD accession. Unluckily, we did it before, but this is, I would say, something what we are doing right now. As you can see, Croatian public administration, we look in the scope of the public sector. So we had, I would say, let's say, I would say that's quite similar. State administration, 14 ministries, 12 state offices with offices and local offices on the local level. Local and regional self-government are playing, let's say, counties are on the regional level. City of Zagreb is having, I would say, it's city and the county at the same time, 127 cities and 428 municipalities. So we are having I would say this problem of fragmentation is something what we are we have a most challenge due to the fact that we lost, I would say, 400,000 people in the 1 decade from the last census. Of course, agencies, funds, institutes, that's something what we also take into account to public administration, and of course, public services, health, education, faculties, and we also must take into account public companies, state companies, and local and regional companies. So quite short on the reform, I would say that's continuous process. You can see that I will provide you with the presentation. So do you have the links on the documents? It's in Croatian, but now it's quite easy to translate all the things in your language. So I mean that's we have already fourth plan for the public administration reform. I would say that's always taking into account changes and developments. As you can see, the first was on fulfillment of chapter 23. Of course, second was as ex-ante conditionalities for ESF project 2015-2020. Of course, Croatia didn't have a possibility of, let's say, opportunity to deal with single principles of public administration that was mentioned before. But I would say that we are working around this, not completely, I would say by these principles, but more or less, I would say that these principles are never-ending target in the reforming process. It's not just as we saw, the problem is not just on the strategic and legal level, but it's the problem of implementation. Of course, we are now in the, as you know, RRF's Recovery and Resilience Facility. So we have the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. I have one slide around the investments that we are doing right now. And of course, the most recent document is our National Public Administration Development Plan as part of National Development Strategy, Croatia 2030. So it's until 2027. So you can see that, of course, we have some kind of I would say, gaps between the plans, but the problem, always the challenge of political change. So and some kind of the pressure. But I would like to point that since I have more than 20 years of experience and in public administration, I would see that when I look European Commission, I would say from the perspective of public servant, professional public servant, that I see European Union as angel guardian in some, I would say, metaphorical sense, since I would say that the European Union is, I would say, professional public servant is bringing this continuity of operation and I would say possibility to change things forward despite of the political changes that are something what we must also take into account and that are part of day-to-day, I would say, business. Short overview of our last National Public Administration Development Plan. You can see that for sure user-oriented administration, that is also now part of the accession. Digital transformation already mentioned. Human resources development, human resources as the heart and the key and the brain of the I would say the major part of the public administration reform and functioning. Of course, capacity for public policy design and implementation, and of course, last part is on the local government, local self-government units, and of course, everything is founded on the principles, as you can see, rule of the law, protection of the citizens' rights, accessibility, equality of treatment, transparency, accountability, and participation. So the next slide, you can see, I mean, say the things, let's say, investment that we are doing right now. You can see one target that we are doing without investment, but I would say we are building upon the project that I'm responsible for the quality management is reduction of the administrative burden by 20% until end of 2025. And then in public administration efficiency, we have recruitment process digitalization and optimization, e-state qualification exam digitalization. Of course, we already mentioned new wage and work models in terms of salary system improvement, of course, and of course, digitalization of the human resources management processes, 9 of them. We also, based on the experiences from the COVID period, we are introducing a hybrid workplace model, smart working. And of course, as one of the major recommendation from the EU semester, we are doing work on further optimization, decentralization of local government self-units. But also, I mean, in the subcomponent 2.6, we are also doing on digitalization of civil service ethics systems, and of course, improving implementation of Act on the right of access to information. So these two investments are also closely connected to the public administration reform. So let's go to the two topics that I took as examples, and let's say how we are approaching them. For sure, regarding psychological support, what we are doing, in Croatia, we also had war. And I agree that, I mean, this psychological support somehow was missed. And this is, I would say, point of interest, or let's say topic that could be discussed a little bit more deeper, but we approach it to the well-being survey in terms of measuring, the situation of the well-being as very important part of the human resources management. And of course, second point is organizational and managerial culture. As you can see, I put in the slide, that of course, I would say that organizational culture we should see as a little bit broader scope, and managerial culture is part of it. But also what is missing, it's I would say statewide culture, because the organization is functioning in the state. And of course, what I mentioned before, EU is also, I would say, bringing and influencing, let's say, this organizational and managerial culture. As I put, the well-being is essential part of managerial culture, and quality management, as I put, could improve organizational and managerial culture and well-being. And the next slide, actually, that is how we are approaching, let's say, development and support of organizational managerial culture. We are having a big project on the quality management introduction. I put you the link, it's in Croatian, but as I said, that's not a problem today. So we did quite huge, I would say, and comprehensive project on introduction of process optimization and standardization. Of course, introduction of the quality management system based on the common assessment framework as holistical approach, and let's say as one of the recommended tools from the European Commission. I would say UPAN, but then supported by Commission. Of course, we did, in the project introduction of all of these standards and the tools in the 118 public administration bodies, all the types, central, local self-government, and the agencies. Of course, we are also providing training, online training on 3 modules, and we also developed IT system for, I would say, putting down all the processes, also providing a path to optimization. And of course, second important part is providing evidences on the self-assessment for the quality management system. So that's it. And regarding psychological support, as I mentioned, we did 2 years ago well-being survey. You can find on the slide the main recommendations, from Croatia. We did it together with the University of Nottingham, Rothschild University, and University College London. Some kind of I would say, they did it in the other countries around the world. But you can see, I mean, the main recommendations. And as you can see that for sure, I mean, 2020, you see that we still have a scope for improving job satisfaction, job engagement, public service motivation, integrity. Of course, this number 7, civil servant lament on lack of praise and recognition, lack of encouragement. And this is actually bringing me to the next slide. Let's say some lessons, let's say, learned in the reform process. So I took liberty and I would say, take two recommendations from your opinion on the application for membership. For sure, I mean, you are in the good position. I'd say that Croatia was on the same time when we went to the accession period. But you can see that this is a problem. It always is the problem with implementation. And I think that the next, I would say, workshop conferences, for sure, you should streamline and go more deeper in how to implement all of these things in the real practice, because it's to move from recommendation to the concrete examples. So I put you two concrete examples how we are approaching. That's not, I would say, perfect, but that's how we are approaching. So, and the second, you see the problem of ensure effective, result-oriented, and efficient governance. It's when we are looking, from it's quite heavy, quite heavy recommendation. It's a lot of things to be done. So I put some kind of the four, let's say, lessons learned, or let's say some kind of recommendation from our side. What I would say missed in the reform process is, let's say, under investment in line management on all public administration levels. Of course, political is also on the priority, but I would say it's more focus on, I would say, this line management on the public servant that are remaining, especially on horizontal processes. And that's, of course, I put quality management, what we are now focusing, human resources management, strategic management, project management, procurement, financial management, integrity and ethics, internal controls, etc. So that's something I was internal auditor for 7 years, and I remember exactly that we invested heavily in internal auditors, but investment into the line manager, into the process owner, was very limited or nothing, and that was the mismatch of the, and this is actually the first recommendation, full implementation of reforms. I would say that the second point is learning culture and organization of learning, I would say, should be continuous and offered, especially I put in brackets online. Now we have not any more problem of the methods, how we will deliver training. And this should be heavily used as we now connected on this conference. So competency framework, very important to say that what we're missing in Croatia still is translation in our in our language. English is not language that we are understanding in our, in public administration. Still, I would say that English is not, I would say, widely understood and known. So I would say that translation should be there of the documents, especially of the methodologies, and of course, flexible and online training. That's something very important. Of course, benchmarking, bench learning that we are doing right now, of course, on organization level in country, what we are doing in quality management, comparing to a similar organization. And of course, on EU worldwide level, that's very important, not to develop hot water, as it always said. And of course, what we're realizing is that the quality management, what I mentioned, it's a separate topic, could be used as comprehensive tool for the reform process. But you must then invest onto, as I said, on the line management level on each public administration body. And that's it. Hopefully, I put. I was in my timing. I will share with you my presentation. So our motto is that, let's say, from our project, that quality is our share in our common future. Especially, I'm speaking here in the name of Ministry of Public Administration, and what you should realize that you must lead by example, and that the ministry should. I would say this is this new role that is quite comprehensive, and that we for sure have a lot of place to share experience how to do it. So how to put this reform process to each, I would say, civil servant level. So thank you very much for having us this opportunity, and we are happy to share with you any kind of the topic or information that you would need in the future. Thank you very much.
Mr. Micetic, thank you for your interesting report and readiness to share your experience with us. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce next speaker, Anna Животовska, psychologist of the Psychological Service of Jerusalem City Council. Госпожа Анна, я с большим удовольствием приглашаю вас поделиться вашим опытом, как вам научилась жить в новой реальности, в войне, и как вы, как психолог, помогали своим согражданам. Вот поделитесь этим опытом.
Добрый день. Я, во-первых, хочу от имени израильтян сказать, что мы все в ужасе от того, что у вас происходит, и желаем вам скорейшей победы. Теперь я не хочу повторять то, что уже звучало на конференции, поэтому мне бы хотелось, чтобы наша беседа протекала интерактивно, чтобы вы спрашивали меня, и я тоже задавала вам вопросы. Установим регламент там по полминуты на вопрос и ответ. Я постараюсь тоже отвечать максимально кратко. Вот. Действительно, то, с чего я хотела начать. Израиль 70 лет живет в условиях террористической войны. Это значит, что всевозможные цели поражения, они являются на самом деле средствами для того, чтобы запугать, деморализовать, вызвать ощущение беспомощности. У нас есть места, где регулярно, иногда месяцами происходят обстрелы. В Иерусалиме этого меньше, но мои родственники жили в квартире соседней с той, в которую просто регулярно попадали пули, поскольку обстреливали из другого района этот дом. Ну, не только эту квартиру, но и другие. Вот как вы считаете, что помогает Израилю жить в этих условиях, при этом люди работают, дети ходят в школу, вечером ходят на площадку, на площадке жизнь продолжается. Как вы считаете, что помогает?
Вот нам хотелось бы от вас услышать все же, что держит людей. То есть либо притупляется страх, чувство страха. Поделитесь, как вы справляетесь, вы как психолог, какую помощь вы даете людям, которые в ней нуждаются. То есть какая есть государственная поддержка, возможно, на государственном уровне. Вы сопровождаете, возможно, вы принимаете участие, даете рекомендации. И доверяют ли вам граждане Израиля вот непосредственно вашим рекомендациям?
Вы затронули самый нерв проблемы, вопрос доверия, вопрос личного справления ситуации. Собственно говоря, чрезвычайные ситуации, обстрелы, опасность для жизни себе и близким. Могу сказать, что это притупляет чувства, но это вызывает накопление стресса. У очень многих есть травмы. То, что в этом помогает, все, что является объектом поражения, все это же может быть ресурсом для восстановления. Обстрелы разрушают преемственности, управление, осознание ситуации, эмоциональные, социальные связи. Один из главных принципов помощи, который в Израиле не только на примере нашей страны разрабатывался. Израильтяне ездят по всему миру в области, где происходили, например, катастрофы. Там помогали вот с этой методикой, так называемая методика моста. выстраивание, восстановление преемственности. Это выстраивание начинается с естественных систем поддержки человека. Прежде всего, с системы организации руководства. Я слышала, что здесь это уже звучало. То есть вот на каждом предприятии, в каждом большом учреждении есть 1-2 инструктора, которые проходят специальную подготовку. Но, в принципе, ответственность за чрезвычайную ситуацию лежит на руководстве. И обязанность инструкторов или психологов, которые там прибывают в качестве инструкторов в какие-то организации, где таких постоянных инструкторов нет, это прежде всего помочь руководителю. Прежде всего справиться с собственным страхом и тревогой и помочь это сделать руководству. Не позволить панике, ощущение, что нужно немедленно что-то делать, и не хватает информации, и вот это вот самая генерализованная тревога, которая куда хуже страха, когда нет определенного страха, когда есть общее ощущение беспокойства и паники, оно опаснее всего. Поэтому первое, что делает, например, психолог, который приходит в какое-то учреждение, скажем, подвергшееся террористической атаке, или в школу после того, как ее обстреляли, или где-то у нас был случай, например, на моем участке, когда пришел террорист в синагоге, расстрелял несколько человек, среди которых были родители детей и соседи. Первое, что происходит, это разговор с директором. Анализ ситуации, создание плана. Потом директор приглашает сотрудников, в случае школы это учителя, и тоже обсуждают, что делать. Как происходит беседа с человеком в ситуации острого кризиса, я могу сказать чуть дальше. После этого учителя расходятся по классам, и там занимаются детьми. Задача оказать поддержку каждому через тех людей, которых он знает и которым он доверяет. То есть прежде всего в школе это учителя, в каком-то учреждении это сотрудники, их руководители. Для детей это, конечно, еще и родители, с которыми проводится специальная беседа. Специалисты не могут добраться до каждого, они могут помочь ответственным людям выполнить их обязанности. Я могу остановиться на главных принципах вот этой вот самой помощи, восстановления преемственности нарушенного чрезвычайной ситуации. Первый принцип – это немедленность, близость и поддержка. Это значит, что не ждут, пока где-то откуда-то приедет главный специалист, все расскажет, или приедет психолог и начнет психологически работать с какими-то самыми тяжелыми. Самое главное – оказать помощь как можно быстрее, потому что именно от этого зависит, будет ли травма и посттравма. На этих понятиях я могу остановиться дальше, если будут вопросы. Могу только сказать, что если происходит сильное нарушение в первый момент, и в особенности в первые недели, то потом оставшиеся последствия травмы могут нарушить функционирование человека на долгие годы, и восстанавливать будет уже гораздо тяжелее. Итак, первый принцип – непосредственность, близость и поддержка. Очень часто психологи приходят, например, в качестве инструкторов, приходят в те учреждения, которых они вообще не знают. Главное, что они находятся физически близко. Тот, кто может прийти быстрее всего, тот окажет самую большую помощь. Второй принцип – это поддержка систем руководства, включая план деятельности, роли, задачи, направленность на действие. Это может быть самое маленькое действие. Скажем, в классе дети будут гораздо спокойнее, если им дадут задание, например, убрать выпавшие стекла, помочь другим. Собственно, здесь мы касаемся самого острия проблемы. В террористической войне армия находится в гораздо лучшем положении, чем мирные жители. В армии есть порядок, есть субординация, есть роли, люди знают, что делать. Там обычно есть доверие руководителю. В учреждениях, в частности в школах, могут быть гораздо более сложные отношения какие-то дисциплинированные дети. В любом учреждении может быть более сложные отношения с руководством, гораздо меньше ожидания этой самой атаки, гораздо меньше понимания, что делать. Поэтому как можно скорее восстановить направленность на действие и управляемость. Второй принцип, не менее важный, это восстановление когнитивной непрерывности. Это значит, что должна быть дана максимальная информация. В случае с детьми без подробностей, но информация должна быть исчерпывающей и правдивой, иначе доверие нарушится. Вот это вот второй пункт к вопросу о доверии. Первый был, что для доверия нужно, чтобы это были по возможности люди, которых человек знает, ребенок знает своих учителей, своих родителей, работники в учреждении знают свое руководство. Второй момент, должна быть дана информация. Иногда для того, чтобы дать информацию, собирают, ну, скажем, в школе собирают все классы в каком-нибудь зале, и там дают общую информацию. При этом рекомендуется, скажем, для родителей уменьшить время просмотра телевизора, не позволить самим себе и детям чересчур увлекаться подробностями событий, потому что и люди, пережившие травму, стремятся без конца получать новую информацию, которая ничего не добавляет, и постоянная прикованность к экранам усиливает тревогу. Должна быть дана информация по сути, и дальше стоит перейти к конкретным действиям. Чем более мелкие это действия, там ты берешь метлу, ты там относишь какие-то материалы или забираешь их от медсестры, ты раздаешь баночки с водой и так далее, и так далее. Чем более мелкие задания, чем больше структурировано время после того, как произошло, ну, в нашем случае произошел теракт, например, тем спокойнее будут сотрудники, в школе это будут дети. Следующий принцип, он уже касается тех, кто находится в состоянии острой травмы. Это могут быть любые необычные проявления. Человек в состоянии острой травмы может быть в панике, он может быть реагировать тремя способами, известными нам из биологии. Он может застыть, он может быть в состоянии бегства, то есть чрезмерного беспокойства. Он может быть в состоянии агрессии, в том числе по отношению к руководителям и учителям. Он может быть в состоянии физического неблагополучия, сердцебиения, спазма мышц и так далее, которых иногда не отличить от физических травм. Вот тех, кто находится в остром состоянии, отделяют и с ними ведут беседу. Это делает психолог или специально подготовленный инструктор. Подготовка инструкторов ведется заранее, раз в сколько-то времени, обычно раз в год, 2 или 3, эти инструкторы приглашаются на какие-то семинары, и там им дается план, вроде того, что я рассказываю сейчас, а в частности план действий в отношении тех, кто находится в состоянии острой травмы, как можно им помочь, что можно с ними делать. Теперь если есть время еще, я остановлюсь на том, как идет беседа с людьми в острой травме, и это отчасти касается и тех, кто находится в обычном состоянии, но в беседе с ними тоже могут быть затронуты дальнейшие пункты. Есть еще время? Да?
3 минуты.
Хорошо. Значит, когда идет беседа, первое, что нужно сделать, это выслушать, дать эмоциональную вентиляцию. Выслушивать важно очень внимательно, повторяя слова человека, потому что ощущение понимания есть только тогда у взрослого или ребенка, когда наши слова повторяют. Интерпретациям здесь особенно не место. После того, как человек рассказал, с дополнительными вопросами, рассказал подробно, что было, это очень важно. Конкретные вопросы заземляют и локализуют пережитое. Происходит успокаивание. Оно может быть в форме нормализации, что да, вот сейчас, когда мы в ситуации опасности, вот нормально, что у вас сердцебиение, нормально, скажем, там у ребенка плакать, нормально бояться. Это происходит со всеми. Все мы там тревожимся за близких. Все мы думаем о том, что произойдет, и не можем отвлечься. Далее происходит переформулировка проблемы, когда ее пытаются сделать в тех пропорциях, в которых она должна быть. Например, действительно произошло там ужасное событие, ну, важно, что твои родители в порядке. Вот. Или да, вот сейчас ты очень беспокоишься о том, что произошло с папой, папа в больнице, давай подумаем, что сделать. Здесь следующий пункт, снова направленность на действие. Давай нарисуем ему рисунок, напишем ему письмо, например, в случае, если это ребенок. Если это взрослый человек, его можно спросить о прежних способах справления с какими-то чрезвычайными ситуациями, обсудить, что ему помогло. Для людей религиозных обычно обращаются к молитве, для людей, которые к этому склонны, могут предложить медитацию, расслабление или приемы дыхания. Далее, последнее, что делается в такой беседе, это определение перспектив, придание смысла и установка на будущее, на то, что мы победим, мы решим эти проблемы. Все это применительно к возрасту и применительно к человеку, по возможности используя его тезаурус, его систему ценностей. Вот, собственно, я изложила то, что я планировала. Если есть вопросы какие-то сейчас, я буду рада ответить.
Госпожа Анна, спасибо вам большое за ваши рекомендации, искренне, абсолютно искренне. Мы сами не знаем, что может случиться завтра, и нам будут полезны ваши рекомендации, как себя вести в той или иной ситуации. Все родители, все имеют детей. И непосредственно вы говорили о чисто человеческом поведении. Вот. Но в момент стресса оно все забывается, это безусловно понятно. Я как ваша коллега, тоже психолог, все это понимаю. И поэтому для нас очень ценно вот сегодня было услышать вас и ваш опыт. Спасибо вам большое. And dear colleagues, I'm really grateful to all of you for the time you've dedicated to our event. I hope that our maybe our and your experience and recommendations will be extremely useful for Ukraine in wartime and post-war periods. We appreciate our cooperation and do hope to have a long-term fruitful interaction with our international partners. Have a nice day and take care of yourselves. Thank you.